Chapter 19. Hardy Benson changes his tune. Of all the cliffhangers proffered during the Purdy hearings, none garnered more attention than the appearance of 15-year-old Harding Thomas Hardy Benson. Dubbed Annie's sweetheart by the local media, Hardy had been her gentleman caller for the past few months, an eternity in the annals of teen romance. The only son of Lute and Ruby Benson, a surname with cloud in Bear River, Hardy was gawky, unerringly polite, and as docile as livestock. Hardy may have captured Annie's heart, but his public persona lacked finesse. His appearance during the coroner's inquest had been brief and entirely forgettable. The only media account of the boy came in the Digby Weekly Courier, which stated that Hardy Benson was put on the stand late in the evening. His evidence was not very important. Benson's testimony was summarily dismissed because it mirrored facts presented by far more compelling witnesses. All Hardy said was that he had seen his girlfriend on the Bear River Bridge at 4 o'clock on the afternoon in question. In actuality, the media's apathy toward Benson could be chalked up to a single factor: his testimony in no way implicated Peter Wheeler. On the stand, Benson made no mention of the man who stood accused. The press and public alike might have forever turned a blind eye to Hardy Benson were it not for an interview Detective Nick Power gave to the Morning Chronicle. Power let slip, in his practiced yet casual manner, that, while transporting Wheeler from Bear River to the Digby jail, the two men had shared their impressions of the coroner's inquest. According to the detective, Wheeler claimed that one witness had perjured himself. The prisoner was outraged because said witness might have cleared his name had he told the truth. Peter reportedly told Power, "Something did not come out that may be some good to me. A respectable young fellow and I went up to Kempton's house that night. The young fellow wanted to go in but I objected and we went back." Wheeler refused to give Power the name of the respectable young fellow, but inquiries in the village soon led the detective to Hardy Benson. During their initial interview, Benson stuck to his original testimony, but Power leaned hard on the boy. He prided himself on his interrogation skills and scoffed at the idea that a teenager could outwit a seasoned lawman. After a few hours of artfully dodging the detective's entreaties, young Hardy began to sing an entirely new tune. Intrigued by Power's tale of an undisclosed witness, the Chronicle reporter also hunted down young Benson. Hardy, his memory jarred loose by Nick Power, now claimed he had met up with Peter Wheeler at Tilly's house that night. The two went to the Kemptons to see Annie, and Peter went inside while Hardy waited at the gate. A few minutes later, Peter came out, threw his arm over Hardy's shoulders, and the two walked back down the hill to Tilly's house. En route, Hardy claimed Peter warned him not to tell anyone they had gone to the Kempton house. Peter then told Hardy that Annie was alone and suggested Hardy go back and stay with her. Benson said no, mindful of the scandal such action would cause, and the boy went home. Hardy told the Chronicle that after the body was found the next day, Peter again cautioned him not to say anything. Wheeler told Benson he had seen 2 knives on the floor near her body, implying the police might think both of them were to blame. The Chronicle's report on Benson was a bombshell. Every rival newspaper reprinted the account and the resulting public outcry grew deafening. Benson's revised account pounded the final nail in Wheeler's coffin. Thanks to the boy's improved recall, the detective could now place Wheeler inside the Kempton home. Of course, Hardy Benson now had a credibility problem, having changed his prior sworn testimony, but Power was confident Prosecutor Kopp could overcome any and all challenges to the lad's integrity. As was often the case with Detective Power's more high-profile cases, the perfect piece of evidence had arrived at the most opportune juncture. Indeed, the timing of Wheeler's purported statement and Hardy's sudden recanting was a tad too convenient. The coroner's inquest had revealed a serious problem with the timeline of the case. Based on inquest testimony, Power could only place Wheeler near the Kempton house around 4:30 in the afternoon. Armed with Benson's surprising revelations, Power now had an eyewitness who put Wheeler through the front door at exactly the right moment. The common denominator in all these expeditious divulgences was Nicholas Power. He was the sole witness to Wheeler's alleged declaration about a perjured witness. Power was also instrumental in convincing, some might say strong-arming, Benson to change his testimony. As Wheeler hurtled toward certain doom, it seems Detective Power was always on hand to grease the skids. When Benson's revelations became public, Peter Wheeler asked to speak to the same reporter from the Morning Chronicle. Peter intended to use the meeting as a fishing expedition, and the journalist later lamented that Wheeler requested more information however than he desired to give. Wheeler entertained the reporter at length in his cell, hoping to gain valuable insight into Benson's abrupt about-face. Although Peter never garnered the answers he sought, the resulting article suggests he still managed to charm the Chronicle correspondent. He is very anxious to discover whether he is to be hung or not, but alleges his innocence with a clear voice and unflinching eye. He requested and was assured that he would receive fair treatment from the Chronicle. If he is a guilty man, his demeanor is wonderful. Although his demeanor won over the Chronicle, Wheeler remained the loser in his escalating war of words with Power. The detective's statements were accepted without challenge by the media and public alike. Wheeler, an accused and all but convicted killer, was not to be believed regardless of the evidence he offered. Even Hardy Benson fared better. His integrity was never called into question by the press, despite having given them ample reason to do so. News of Benson's alteration sent shock waves through the community. If Wheeler had hoped Benson's tale would exculpate him, he was sadly mistaken. In fact, things only looked bleaker for the accused man. As the uproar reached its zenith, Detective Power again sat down with the Morning Chronicle to share his latest thoughts with the public. If Hardy Benson could rewrite history without ramifications, so could Nick Power. After a week of investigation, Power was at last ready to reveal his theory of the crime. As he saw it, the events were straightforward. Wheeler, having lied to ensure Annie was alone, tried to rape her in the early afternoon. When she fought valiantly to preserve her honor, he picked up a piece of firewood and struck her about the head, fleeing the house as she lay moaning in a pool of her own blood. Fearing Annie might not be dead, Wheeler enlisted the unwitting Benson as cover and the two men returned to the Kempton house. Wheeler tried to convince Benson to enter, but when the boy refused, Wheeler went in and finished the job with the two knives. It was a compelling narrative, particularly when viewed uncritically. The problem, of course, remained the timeline. Annie was seen by multiple witnesses throughout the afternoon and evening, leaving Wheeler no time to mount a single attack, much less two. Still, no one openly questioned Power's deductive skills. When queried as to Benson's sudden change of tune, Power again put himself at the center of the controversy, saying, "When Benson was on the stand, I noticed that he was not giving a full statement of what he knew of the case." When Power confronted the boy, he broke down and revised his statement. What Power exalted as brilliant detective work, others might call coercion and witness tampering. Potato. Whatever else Power's one-man media campaign accomplished, it had chummed the waters for the feeding frenzy that was to follow. Purdy's exam found a new breakout star, Annie's sweetheart, and he single-handedly promised to put the knife in Wheeler's hand. As young Hardy Benson took the stand and swore his oath, he was the most exciting thing to happen in Digby County since the crime itself. With all the hype, it was inevitable that Benson's actual court appearance proved to be something of a disappointment. Hardy, the personification of a gangly awkward teen, was not a dynamic speaker. Pathologically fearful of the opposite sex and crowds, Benson's knees visibly knocked as he haltingly took the witness stand before the looming Judge Purdy. His terror was palpable and served as a delightful amuse-bouche to the hungry stable of onlookers who had traveled great distances to hear what the young man had to say. Although Benson's oratory skills left much to be desired, his newly revised testimony still managed to pack a formidable wallop. He began his account by restating the portions of his original testimony he claimed were still true. He had seen Annie Kempton on the bridge around 4 in the afternoon but had not spoken to her. Then, in a painfully bumbling segue, Benson stated that his memory of the night had dramatically improved, although Power's role in the miraculous turnabout was left uncredited. Cop, who stood to gain from Benson's newest version of events, let the remark pass uncontested. The sandy foundations of Benson's memory continued to shift. Contrary to what he had told the Morning Chronicle, Benson now swore he did not meet Wheeler at Tilly's house but rather had run into Peter on the road leading to the Kemptons. The two started talking and Hardy claimed he had asked Peter, "Have you seen Annie tonight?" To which Wheeler replied he had not. They decided to pay her a social call, and as the men made their way toward her house, Annie remained the sole topic of conversation. In yet another explosive revelation, Benson stunned the crowd when he stated that Wheeler had referred to Annie as the Satan. According to Hardy's latest installment, Peter then went into the Kempton house to talk to Annie, leaving Benson alone on the road. Minutes later, Wheeler ran from the house and draped his arm around Hardy's shoulders. Shifting uncomfortably in the witness dock, Benson unleashed another new twist. He told the court that as the pair wandered back toward Wheeler's boarding house, Benson turned and saw a light suddenly appear in the sitting room window of the Kempton house. This latest disclosure was not what the prosecution was expecting and Cop moved on quickly. Picking up his rapidly unraveling narrative thread, Hardy soldiered on. When the men reached the road leading to Tilly's front door, Benson insisted they had the following exchange. Hardy, was Grace Morini with her? Peter, no. Hardy, do you suppose I had better go back and stop with her? Peter, you had better go back and stop with her. Hardy, oh no, I have never been in the habit of stopping with her when she is alone. She might think it funny. Hardy then said that he and Wheeler met Tilly Como and her children on the road and the group went into the boarding house. Just before 9 o'clock, Benson left the Como residence and swore he went straight home, arriving at about 9:15 p.m. Benson's meandering testimony both helped and hurt the detective's case. If all the eyewitnesses were to be believed, the only window of opportunity Wheeler had to commit the crime was the time he spent in the house while Benson waited outside. Yet, by the boy's own account, Benson heard and saw nothing out of the ordinary during that time. Benson's comments during his cross-examination only added to Powers' woes. When pressed for specifics by defense counsel Dwight Ruggles, Benson was adamant that Wheeler had no blood on him when he left Annie's house that night. Furthermore, Hardy's claim that a light came on in the Kempton house after Wheeler left indicated Annie was still alive as the men walked away. Benson's account also called into question the footprint evidence Bernard Parker had so painstakingly documented. If Wheeler had not gone near the pig barn or crossed any fields with Benson, how were the footprints related to the crime? The short answer was that either the footprints were irrelevant or Wheeler was not the killer. Since neither answer was acceptable to Power or the prosecution, the question was never raised. Before releasing him from the stand, Ruggles put one last question to the trembling witness: why had he lied during the coroner's inquest? Rendered almost mute with guilt, shame, and fear, Benson finally mumbled that Wheeler had threatened him to stay quiet. When Ruggles asked how Wheeler might harm him, given that Peter was in police custody, Hardy stated that Wheeler had sent him a warning through another man, telling him to keep quiet. This proclamation elicited a burst of outrage from the crowd. Was there no end to Wheeler's villainous treachery? Although Benson would not name the messenger who conveyed Wheeler's dire threat, it did not take Power long to find him. Willie Henshaw, another 15-year-old boy from the village, claimed to be the envoy, and Prosecutor Kopp rushed Henshaw onto the witness stand. Once again, a timeline proved crucial to the ever-evolving saga. Power had taken Wheeler into custody on Wednesday, January 29. On Thursday, Willie Henshaw claimed Wheeler had given him a message to give to Benson just before Hardy took the stand at the coroner's inquest. According to Willie, Wheeler told him to ask Hardy to lie and tell Lovett that they had not been to Annie's house that night. The strange house of cards did not stand for long. Under defense questioning, Willie Henshaw admitted he had not delivered the message to Hardy Benson, although the admission did little to stifle the crowd's disgust. To those assembled, Henshaw's claims were simply further proof of Wheeler's mendacious and conniving nature. Their collective certainty blinded them to the gaping hole Henshaw had just ripped in the space-time continuum. Henshaw's testimony may have corroborated Benson's, but it contained two fatal flaws, serious contradictions that are as evident today as when Henshaw took the stand. The first is the very real question of how a teenage boy gained access to a prisoner in protective custody. When cross-examined by Ruggles, Henshaw was grilled as to where his alleged meeting with Wheeler had taken place. Willie replied he had spoken to Peter in Mr. Purdy's office in the place which is used by Mr. Harris as a harness room. The conversation could not have occurred during the coroner's hearing as such an arrangement did not exist until Purdy's examination more than 1 week after the inquest had ended. The second far more puzzling issue is this: if Henshaw never delivered the message, how did Hardy Benson know Wheeler had threatened him from jail? Such is the nature of time, covert manipulations of it are not always apparent in the moment. The testimonies of Hardy Benson and Willie Henshaw were textbook examples of the chronological tomfoolery plaguing the Wheeler case. In all probability, the two teens were earnest in their desire to help. It is unlikely either testified purely out of spite toward Wheeler. Rather, they were influenced by adults in positions of authority who convinced them their testimony was necessary to convict an evil man accused of a heinous crime, the murder of their dear friend. With some necessary gerrymandering, the boys' statements plugged the trouble spots in Power's theory of the case. Benson put Wheeler in the house and Henshaw gave Benson a reason to lie. On the surface, the evidence seemed compelling and damning. Upon reflection, both stories lacked internal logic and consistency. Most troubling of all was Power's steadfast refusal to acknowledge the conflicting evidence in his case. The detective was so certain of Wheeler's guilt that he trusted his own hunches and suppositions at the expense of more substantial evidence to the contrary. For Power, the focus had shifted from reconstructing the crime and identifying the perpetrator to inculpating the accused at all costs. That Power's reputation for infallibility was also on the line only motivated him further. With the benefit of hindsight, it is clear that Benson's and Henshaw's respective testimony had been molded by others, and it was hard not to see Detective Power's fingerprints all over the result.